Well, let's take a closer look at the results. More than 2,500 council seats were up for grabs in 107 English councils. Results are still coming in, but as of a few minutes ago, 91 of those have declared. Labour have gained 8 councils overall and the Conservatives have lost 6. There's been no change for the Lib Dems or the Greens, and there's 3 fewer with no overall control. In terms of councillors, Labour have gained 164, with the Conservatives losing 386, heading towards the most pessimistic predictions for their overall performance. The Lib Dems gained 71, the Greens gained 48, and there are 84 more independents. Reform UK has won 1 council seat. In the 4 English mayoral races for which we have results, there's now a Labour mayor in the Prime Minister's backyard after they won in York and North Yorkshire. The PM, of course, is the MP for Richmond. Labour mayors too for the North East and the East Midlands, the first time any of them were contested. The Tories breathed a very big sigh of relief after holding on to Tees Valley. Labour had been hoping to unseat Ben Houchen, as we've heard. So some comfort there for the PM, but the day started with a big blow for Rishi Sunak. Labour claiming a massive win in the Blackpool South parliamentary by-election with a 26% swing. That's the 3rd highest Labour to Tory swing in post-war history. Results have also been declared in 26 police and crime commissioner contests in England and Wales, with Labour flipping 8 from the Conservatives. Plaid Cymru held on to theirs. Krish.
Thanks. Well, with so many losses, Rishi Sunak has described the night as disappointing, but is apparently sure voters will stick with the Tories come the general election. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
One of the things pollsters do in these elections is extrapolate the national equivalent vote. And that is trying to look at basically where the parties stand. And when you look at that figure, and there are different versions available, we've got our own, about a 10-point Labour lead in our one. Other extrapolations come out with something similar. A lot of people might be scratching their heads and saying, well, hang on, I thought Labour had a 20-point lead or something of that order in the opinion polls. What's happening here? And what's happening here is that this is a set of local elections, and quite often the vote dissipates on the non-government side to different causes and coalesces when it comes to a general election a bit more, and that is obviously what Keir Starmer will be hoping happens. But even in these local elections, when you drill down into the numbers and look at the key seats that Keir Starmer needs to win to get a decent majority in a general election, he's doing quite well in those seats. And Labour would say, look also at the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. Low turnouts quite often, sometimes dismissed, but quite often more of a 2-horse battle. And in those, Labour is doing really quite well. There are some concerns for Labour in these numbers, though, and that is to do with sometimes more left-leaning voters who are drifting away from Labour, maybe in some wards, and as you said, Muslim voters who seem to be definitely walking away from Labour in some numbers. That could end up being more of an issue for Labour in government than necessarily trying to win an election to get into government. But for Rishi Sunak, well, it looks pretty grim wherever you look. That 25% share of the vote, which we think he's going to hit when all the numbers are in, is really quite close to rock bottom for the Conservative Party. There are distinctly flashing red lights on his dashboard. It looks like he's going to evade any sort of immediate coup inside his party, as some MPs were threatening. One of them said to me he's got a stay of execution. Well, we'll see about that. But definitely red lights flashing on his dashboard tonight. Here's what we know so far about the results.
If you remember one result from yesterday's elections, Keir Starmer would like it to be the Blackpool by-election, where the swing to Labour nudged post-war records.
This was a parliamentary vote. This was directly to Rishi Sunak to say we're fed up with your decline, your chaos and your division, and we want change.
But across the country, Labour brought gloom to Tory councillors. Here in Redditch, Labour snatched control of the council. In true blue Aldershot, Rushmore Council, some Tories couldn't quite believe the results in front of them. Some had to look away. Labour took control, and long-serving Tory councillors were rejected by the voters.
Yes, I mean, the national picture didn't help on the doorstep. Some people didn't vote at all because of the situation, but it was quite clear that we were fighting on many fronts.
Labour's team celebrating that council gain. Based on the votes cast in yesterday's local elections, in a general election, Aldershot, branded the home of the British military, would swing decisively to Labour. On yesterday's votes, Plymouth Moorview would go from safe Tory to Labour. And in the Red Wall, Great Grimsby, which went Tory in 2019, could return to the Labour Party. The Red Wall provided some comfort for the Conservatives. Ben Houchen held on as mayor of Teesside after a campaign in which he long-fingered his party and his leader.
It's not about Rishi Sunak or the government. It's not voting on Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak. The mess that's going on in Westminster.
But that didn't stop Rishi Sunak rushing to Teesside to bask in the mayor's victory glory.
I've got a message for the Labour Party too, because they know that they had to win here in order to win a general election. They know that. They assumed that Tees Valley would just stroll back to them, but it didn't. It didn't. People knew that they couldn't be taken for granted. They knew that it was Ben and the Conservatives that delivered for them.
But within Teesside, Labour took back control of Hartlepool Council. In these numbers, they'd take back the parliamentary seat Jill Mortimer won for the Tories 3 years ago. She says fellow MPs must stop talking about deposing Rishi Sunak.
I think any talk of changing leader going into a general election is for the birds, to be quite honest. You know, we will stick in, we will stick together as a party.
Channel 4 News analysis has extrapolated from the results so far share of the vote figures for the two main parties. It projects Labour could be on 35% and the Tories skirting an all-time low at 25%, a 10-point Labour lead. Labour in opposition has had smaller leads in local elections and gone on to lose the general election a year later. This lead is closer to the sort enjoyed by Tony Blair ahead of his landslide general election victory. But it's not as big as the 20-point opinion poll leads Labour's been getting.
Local elections are a very different beast to general elections. What we're seeing in terms of the Conservatives' performance is among the worst performances that they've ever had in local elections. But what's different in local elections is that you get a more fragmented opposition vote. The Lib Dems do better, the Greens do better, Independents do better, and all of that is even more true now than it used to be in, say, the 1990s when Tony Blair was opposition leader. So many of those voters will rally behind the Labour banner when we get to a Westminster election.
The Lib Dems celebrated victory in Winchester, parading dinosaurs with blue rosettes.
Make this Conservative government history.
But the party's 17% projected share of the national vote will be hard to match in a general election. There were Green Party gains, some on councils where they've never won before. In Pendle, independents who've left Labour over Keir Starmer's policy on Gaza won seats from Labour. And across the country, wards with larger Muslim populations showed a distinct drop in Labour support. Keir Starmer travelled to North Yorkshire, a few miles from Rishi Sunak's home, to celebrate the election of a Labour mayor there.
I think we're in his constituency now, celebrating this victory.
Rishi Sunak had started his day a few minutes' drive away at Catterick Barracks. On the evidence of results out so far, his party has not advanced on his watch. Some who'd planned to mount a coup against him in the coming days say they won't move on him now, but don't rule out trying again a little later.
Gary Gibbon, well, in a few minutes we'll be hearing from Labour's Yvette Cooper. But first, the Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride joins us from Westminster. Thanks for joining us. Rishi Sunak went to Tees Valley and claimed that Labour has to win there in order to win the general election. That is just not true, is it? In fact, it's patently nonsense.
It's right at the heart of the Red Wall, as you will know. and Labour certainly have to make major inroads back into the red wall. Now,
Which they did.
What Ben Houchin, of course, has done is won emphatically there, over 60% of the vote.
Yeah.
And you've got to remember that in 2021, the last set, when he got 73%, that was a high watermark for us. We had the COVID bounce, we were riding high in the polls and so on. And in fact, he won in every single one of the 5 boroughs that sit beneath that
but as you know,
area.
it's a personal vote.
It's a big result.
I mean, the point of the mayors was to create big personalities. That's what Ben Houchin is. He's got a big personal name recognition, a personal vote. He barely mentioned the Conservatives or Rishi Sunak in his campaign. He was the only one not wearing a party rosette on the platform, didn't mention the Conservatives or Rishi Sunak in his speech. It's about him, not about the party. And, you know, it's just nonsense to suggest Labour needs to win there.
No, look, Ben Houchin stood as a proud Conservative, having enacted Conservative policies under a Conservative government. Literature that was used up there to campaign on did bear the Conservative logo. The hustings, he would have been there promoted as a Conservative. And of course, when people came to the polling booth and their pen hovered over the various boxes they could put a cross on, right next to Ben Houchin's name would have been the Conservative logo and the word Conservative. And I think it's slightly patronising to suggest, to the extent that some are at least, that people didn't really, you know, they weren't really voting for the Conservatives.
Well, no, I mean,
he was clearly a Conservative candidate.
You've heard people in our package saying that they voted for Ben Houchin, but they don't support the Conservatives. That's my point. Anyway, we'll move on from that.
But what about Harlow? Harlow was a result that didn't go Labour's way, and you had the Leader of the Opposition down there the night before with Angela Rayner, making it very clear that Harlow is exactly the kind of place that Labour had to win if they were going to get the keys to number 10 Downing Street, and they didn't do that.
But it is nonsense to say any of these places are places Labour has to win. What Labour needs to do is win a majority, and it's way on course to do that, as you know. I mean, the point is, if Rishi Sunak...
Keir Starmer's comments.
Yeah, if Rishi Sunak is currently... I mean, you look at the projected national vote share, and what's happened over the last 24 hours, he's leading you over an abyss. You are going into a big black hole. Why wouldn't you get rid of him?
There is a huge difference between a set of local election results, which I accept have been difficult in many areas, and a general election. And what we're going to see now is we're going to see this contest narrow down to whether we want Rishi Sunak, who's got a very clear plan based on what people want us to focus on. So that's getting inflation down, getting the cost of living.
That was what the campaign was about.
Well,
and
no,
it didn't
these
work.
are important. They're important points,
and
because I'm answering your question. You're going to
keep repeating them, aren't you? Rather than change tack.
It's going to come down to the only poll that matters, which is going to be the general election when it comes. And then it is going to be Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer. Now, at the moment, I suspect in these local results, you've seen a lot of Conservatives sitting on their hands. They are grumpy for various reasons. But ultimately, everybody's going to have to take that decision as to whether you want Keir Starmer or not. There's no great enthusiasm for Keir Starmer out on the doorstep. I know that. Labour activists
Isn't grumpy a slightly disrespectful way to talk about Conservative activists?
I don't think... no, I didn't say Conservative activists. I was referring to voters. Yeah, no, I think people are entitled to be grumpy.
To call voters grumpy.
No, I'm not being disrespectful
Maybe they just think you're useless.
No, look, the point that I'm making, and I think it's a very fair point, is that people too get grumpy with governments of all stripes when they're in office. We've gone through a very challenging time. We've had inflation imported into the country through a war in Europe. We've had COVID before that, with all the kind of interventions the government had to bring forward in order to save the economy and save jobs and avoid mass unemployment. And Rishi Sunak was right at the heart of that, in fact, as Chancellor. You know, that has been a very difficult time. So what we've got to do now as a party is unite. And as I think your trailer leading up to this interview has suggested, that is precisely what the Parliamentary Party is now going to do. Unite behind our leader, unite behind our very clear agenda and the things that we are doing.
So you're not going to change course.
And
you're going to
come
stick
forward to the country with a manifesto that will address and continue to address the key concerns.
So what you're doing is asking people to change their minds. I mean, you're not going to change. You're going to keep saying the same 5 messages, and you're going to hope that the voters somehow change their minds about
I know
you?
Christian, I know you don't want me to explain what these 5 messages are, for example, but some of your viewers may be getting a bit confused now because we're talking about things in the abstract. So I do think I need to lay them out. People care about the cost of living. They care about inflation coming down.
Yeah.
They care about the fact that real wages have been increasing in each of the last 9 months. They care about illegal migration, where we have a plan in place to deal with that and have a deterrent. And Labour are saying,
you're proving my point very well.
For 90,000 plus people, what Labour are going to do is effectively a soft amnesty for those people. Now, as we go towards the general election, Keir Starmer is going to come under the kind of scrutiny that only happens during a general election campaign. And whereas at the moment he has no plan and we don't know what he stands for on many, many different things because he's frightened of saying anything lest he jeopardise his poll lead, we're going to start to have a serious debate and he will be put under scrutiny.
Mel Stride.
And I think you'll find that the polls will narrow through time.
Well, Labour are going to be under scrutiny right now. Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed. Now over to Jackie.
Well, Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, is here with me now. Yvette Cooper, was it a good night on your own merits, or, as Mel Stride suggests, just a good night because voters are grumpy with the government?
Evening, Jackie. Well, I think dismissing voters as being grumpy it completely doesn't get what's happening across the country. I think people are desperate for change and they were supporting Labour to deliver that change. We obviously had a very good result in Blackpool. That was the one parliamentary result that we had, a more than 20% swing, and that's the 6th parliamentary by-election that we've won with a more than 20% swing this Parliament. But we're also got to keep working, and we know that we will keep working. We really need to see a general election. That's what I think everybody wants to see as soon as possible.
As you suggest, Labour's mantra is that you cannot be complacent. So where would you identify the potential weaknesses last night? Was it Harlow? As Mel Stride said, Keir Starmer had said it was critical. Was it Ben Houchen hanging on to the Tees Valley? Are there areas that you are worried about?
Well, I think we saw progress right across the country. So, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, which took place really in every corner of the country, we saw Labour wins for the first time for Cumbria, for Norfolk, for Cleveland, for Avon and Somerset, really all corners of the country where we saw strong Labour results. And that was really a Labour success.
And failures in Harlow. Keir Starmer had said it was absolutely critical. Ben Houchen, you know, one of the arguments being made that when Conservatives deliver in their area, voters are not looking to run to you.
Well, just to finish the point on the Police and Crime Commissioners first, and then to address that, is I think it was important, you're right, those were off sometimes areas where there were no other elections. However, it was a strong support for Labour on law and order, on an issue the Conservatives continue to think that they're doing well. And actually, they're doing really badly because we're not seeing the police on the streets, when people are not getting justice through the criminal justice system. But on the Tees Valley mayor, obviously, look, I think there's not just personal factors involved. There was also a 17% swing from Labour to from the Conservatives to Labour. So that was a big increase in that vote. And we also won the Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner, which was a similar area. So, again, I think for the Conservatives to say, oh, that shows it's all right for us, shows they just don't get it and they don't
But equally, it's not all right for Labour either, is it? What is clear, what is very, very clear, is the issue of Gaza and the Labour Party's response to it has cost Labour councils seats. I just wonder whether the leadership should apologise for damaging the efforts of local councillors, local activists, because of what many people see as the really poor handling of the Gaza situation.
Well, there's no doubt that the Gaza has been a factor in some areas, and obviously in some council areas there have been other factors as well, but there's no doubt, and we should
in Pendle, Labour didn't win any seats after all their councillors stood as independents because of Gaza. In Blackburn, Labour held on but lost seats as some councillors also stood as independents.
Sure, and there's no doubt it has been an issue in areas. In some areas we've had particular other candidates campaigning very strongly on that issue, and this is an issue where tens of thousands of people have died, including the majority of them women and children. So, rightly, people feel very strongly about this, and it's why it's so important.
And they feel the Labour leadership should have called for a ceasefire much, much earlier. Clive Betts, the Sheffield MP today, says that Labour need to understand the amount of anger that he saw on the doorstep has to be seen to be believed, and that the party really needs to make a radical change now. It's got to make absolutely clear, he says, we cannot stand by and watch Israel wreak destruction on Gaza. Is he right? Is that what Labour will now do?
Well, I think it's clear we need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It is devastating what's happening. We're deeply worried about the risks that Israel may then pursue a Rafah offensive, which would be catastrophic in humanitarian terms. That's why the immediate ceasefire is so important. We have to have the release of hostages, but we also have to have a major programme of humanitarian aid. And we are deeply worried about what's happening. So the negotiations are immensely important.
From the point of view of Labour, to bring back some of those people, those many, many councillors who stood as independents because they were so angered by the Labour Party's response to this. How will you know, there is a danger going into an election that this becomes an even bigger issue for Labour. What are you going to do about it to bring back those people into the fold?
And I think, as I said, it's important to recognise that this was a factor in some areas. And, of course, in every area, we always need to reflect and to seek to rebuild, to earn back support, and we must continue to do that. But we also need to, I think, continue to do a lot of the work we've been doing right across the country, which has delivered such strong results for Labour, but we need to keep working, whether that be in areas where we didn't win votes, areas we might have lost votes, but also the areas that we have won a lot
really
more
briefly,
support.
if you would,
really
the West
important.
Midlands mayoral race is very, very tight. If Labour voters turn away from you on this issue, it could cost you that, couldn't it?
Well, again, we have been campaigning across the West Midlands. Again, this would be an area where, you know, we've always known that there were a strong popular local candidate and so on, but we've also seen, I think, the increases in support across the Midlands. We've just won the East Midlands mayoral candidate. Claire Ward has now become the East Midlands mayor. So we will continue across the Midlands, the North, the South, right across the country.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. Christian.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's take a closer look now at one area that switched from Conservative to Labour last night. Before yesterday, the Tories were in control of Nuneaton and Bedworth Council in Warwickshire, but they lost 11 seats and Labour gained power by winning 15. Our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, is there for us. Paul.
Yeah, this is a council that has flip-flopped backwards and forwards between Conservatives and Labour, but Labour had a mountain to climb here. Last night, they had 5 seats. Right now, they have 20 seats, and most significantly, a majority for the first time since 2018. There were some big losses as well. The Conservative deputy leader lost her seat. Now, the Tories have pointed at the turnout, 27.5%, so that's an issue on how badly they've done, a lot of voter apathy. But many of the Tory candidates and councillors here point at one other thing, not what's happening here with the Conservative Party, but what's happening with the Conservative Party in Parliament.
We're a few hours yet until we get a result. What are you feeling?
Confident. I'm feeling confident and looking forward to the result. So.
We're trying very hard not to smile here. They haven't even counted them yet.
Well, because I've been going around and it's looking good.
It's not looking too brilliant at the moment.
Why not? How's it looking?
It's looking good. Yeah, it's good.
Is this your competition down here?
Yes.
Let's have a quick... I'm going to have to...
All right.
Excuse me. Hello there, we're from Channel 4. How's it looking?
Yeah, so far it's good.
He said the same thing. You can't both be looking good for the pair, yeah?
For now, it's good.
But that soon changed. Ward after ward, councillor after councillor.
Councillor for...
Oh, councillor for Stocking 40s.
How does that feel to say?
Oh, it feels amazing.
Labour gained 15 seats and control of the council.
I'm just emotional. I can't get the words out, but it means so much to me.
Those wins, though, came at Conservative cost.
I lost by quite a significant margin, just by winning it 3 years ago by a fairly good margin.
What was it? What's brought you down?
What was it? Many things really, but I think if I'm being bold, I think Warwickshire County Council and the government have a lot to answer for in this election. In a bellwether seat like this, the government shouldn't be happy with these results. I represent one of the poorest parts in the UK, the poorest part of Warwickshire, and the people feel so disillusioned. They feel like government isn't listening. They feel like there's nothing they can do. There's no conduit to central government. And as their representative, I have to agree with them.
But I don't think they realise this is a local election and not the government one, you know.
Is that what you think you're being judged on?
Yes, I think we are.
How does that feel when you're a local person that's gone out night after night knocking doors, and then that's what you're being judged on?
Well, I don't really know. I should feel a bit devastated because I walked and walked and walked and talked to people and tried to help people. I mean, help people before I even started to do this. So, yes, I think they're looking at the bigger picture rather than looking after the town that we're in.
Yay! 2 seats were won by the Greens and the Conservatives did pick up 16.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Delighted.
But for the former leader, a life in opposition beckons.
Of course it's disappointing that we didn't keep control of the council, but if you look at the national opinion polls, Labour should be wiping the floor with us here in Nuneaton and Bedworth, and they didn't.
And for the National Party, which many Conservatives here believe are responsible for today's results, a message.
It needs to get a grip. It needs to unify around the leader. Divided parties don't win elections.
Do you think that this is an election which the Labour Party have won or the Tory Party have lost?
Oh, we won. We won.
The challenge for Labour in this bellwether seat now, to do the same in a general election.
Now, Paul, tomorrow, of course, you'll be giving us the result of the West Midlands Mayor result, which is another big personality, Andy Street. Any indications of how it's going?
Well, the move from both camps is that it is close. However, talking to Labour sources, they think Andy Street may have just kept his seat. And the feeling is that they point to Gaza as what's cost them votes. But look, going into today's race, the narrative that was being pumped out was that, look, if Rishi Sunak manages to keep Andy Street, if he manages to keep Ben Houchen up in Teesside, it's probably enough to keep him in post. And the narrative today has been that actually, lots of those Tory plotters, they haven't been plotting. There is another factor to throw into this. Look back at our report there. Look at councillors, look at Tory councillors who have spent the last few weeks going door to door, knocking, and they are feeling depressed, they are feeling defeated. In just a few months' time, the Prime Minister, his MPs, will be asking those exact same people to go out and do exactly the same all over again. And that is worrying a lot of Conservative MPs.
Thanks, Paul. Big day tomorrow. Get some sleep. Jackie.
Well, there are other places where there have been clear signs that Sir Keir Starmer's stance on the Gaza war has cost Labour votes. In Pendle in Lancashire, Labour failed to win any seats on the borough council. There's evidence that the party has taken a hit in areas with significant Muslim populations. Our communities editor, Darshna Soni, is in Pendle now. Darshna, what is the situation?
Well, there was disappointment here in Pendle for Labour, Jackie. They failed to win any seats on the council. We tried to speak to Labour Party members afterwards and they told us they wouldn't be giving interviews. I have to say they disappeared pretty sharpish after the counts. Before the election, 10 Labour councillors resigned and sat as independents. And of those who are up for re-election, they all won as independents. So Labour doesn't have any councillors left here in Pendle. Now, some are comparing it to what happened to Labour after the Iraq War. It wasn't just here in Pendle. The party suffered losses in areas like Burnley and Blackburn. And in Oldham, they lost overall control of the town council. Now, Oldham does have a particularly complicated local history. The party had been seeing a loss of support there before October the 7th, but still the loss came as a shock. And some initial analysis suggests that in wards that have more than 10% of the population who are Muslim, the party's share fell by 8%. And Oldham, of course, neighbours Rochdale, where George Galloway recently won a by-election by campaigning on the issue of Oldham. I spoke to one councillor here who had resigned as a Labour councillor. He won today as an independent. Listen to what he told me and what it says to you about the issue of Palestine.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
This is not just for the people of Pendle, this is for the people of Palestine. This is for the 2.5 million who are still under siege. This victory is for them in particular. This was the reason myself and my agent and my leader, Councillor Yasser Iqbal, resigned from the Labour Party in October, and obviously the people have now spoken.
And as Councillor Ashraf also said to me, it's not just Muslims, of course, who care about the issue of Gaza. Many people here raised it on the doorsteps. That's what some Conservative councillors said to me as well. And today the party's campaign coordinator, Pat McFadden, has done a round of interviews saying the party acknowledges it has to listen to voters on this issue and try and win back their trust. Because the big question for the party is, if this is what's happening in local elections, how will it play out in the general election?
Now, as we've heard, Reform UK came close to pushing the Tories into third place in the Blackpool South by-election, but their national vote share after the local elections is looking like just 11%. Good enough to damage the Tories, not good enough to win seats themselves. And so far, they've only won one council seat in these elections. The party's leader, Richard Tice, joins us now from Westminster. It's clear, looking at the Blackpool South by-election, that you are helping Labour into power. Do you think Labour will make a better government than the Conservatives?
Look, we're delighted with our strongest by-election results. We almost beat the Tories into third place with about just 17%, and that's way above our national polling. So look, we're making good progress. No one's saying it's easy, but the reality is the two main parties, there's no difference between them. They're both essentially forms of socialism, high taxes. We've got the highest taxes for 70 years.
There's no real difference.
There's no difference. You know, socialism is a catastrophe. High taxes, high wasteful government spending, public sector outcomes are disastrous. We've got mass immigration that no one voted for. And the reality is we've got no growth. We've got the longest recession per person since records began 70 years ago. And there's nothing in Labour's plans that's going to turn that round. So we're heading towards catastrophe. Unless we change course.
Well, you mentioned the 17% vote share in Blackpool South, but the national projected share, based on the local election votes, has you more like 11%. That's not really good enough, is it? Well, that's not a breakthrough election for you.
We've always said we're focusing on the general election, standing 630 candidates, the local elections up and down the country, and for example, in the north, actually in Sunderland, we beat the Conservatives in 16 out of 25 wards. Some of our wards, we almost beat Labour with about 32%. In Barnsley, we beat the Conservatives in 9 out of 10. So look, and the reality is, in the north, in the north, we are now becoming the party of opposition to Labour. As the Tories are sinking, we are surging. And, you know, Rome's not built in a day. This is a multi-election project. But as I say, we're focusing on the general election, and we're going to be standing 630 candidates. And by the summer, if we keep making this progress and the Tories keep sinking, frankly, we're going to be level pegging with them.
Is Nigel Farage coming back?
Look, good question. You'll have to ask him yourself. He's got a big decision to make.
You must know.
The more help we can, the Nigel's able to give, the better. But he's obviously got other obligations, and it's a big decision for him. We've got obviously the general whenever it is. So let's wait and see. Patience is a virtue.
I mean, it's a clever strategy, isn't it? Because he gets huge profile on the television to sort of spread his message, and then he can switch at the last minute to stand as a candidate. Is that the plan?
He's made it very clear that he thought he'd left frontline politics, but reform is making great progress, and the country's in a terrible state. The Tories have completely broken Britain. No, the Tories have broken Britain, and the reality is that Britain needs reform in so many areas. Our economy needs reform, our healthcare system is a disaster, it needs reform, our immigration system needs reform, law and order is completely out of control, as tragically we've seen this week. These are the areas that we're making progress, we've got big, bold plans, and if Nigel feels able to come and give it a bit of extra heave, then fantastic.
But I mean, he's the honorary president.
He's the honorary president, he plays no executive role.
Named on your company's
He plays no executive role in the running of the party. He's got his broadcast career that he enjoys enormously. So look, let's wait and see whether or not he.
Do you think he'd make any difference?
Sorry, say again?
Do you think he'd make any difference?
He's the best known politician.
To your vote share?
He's the best known politician in the country. So if he is able to come back, then that's clearly going to help. And the more help, the better. It's a big job trying to save Britain from the terrible state we're in, and from the fact that Starmageddon's policies are going to make no difference to turning this country around from the trouble we're in.
So if the Tories came to you and offered you a deal, I mean, I know it's unlikely, but if they did, you're not interested.
The answer is no.
Because you think they're all the same.
They're all the same.
You are the ultimate protest vote then in these elections,
aren't you? No, we are the ultimate alternative. The two existing main parties are the same.
You're not going to win anything, so...
Look, I'm sorry, that's a ridiculous thing to say. We've almost beat the Tories in this by-election. What you've just confirmed, though...
second place.
Hang on, no, but what you've just confirmed...
Not to win the seat.
What you've just confirmed is the ludicrous nature of our electoral system, first past the post, which is completely unjust. We need proportional representation. We're going to get some seats tomorrow in the GLA Assembly under proportional representation, for example. That's our objective. But look, we've got the hand we're dealt with. Our objective in this election is to secure as many or more votes cast than the Conservatives. It's ambitious, but we think we can get there.
Well, as we've heard, one piece of good news grasped by the Conservatives today came when Ben Houchen triumphed over a Labour surge to remain as Mayor of Tees Valley, which includes Middlesbrough, Darlington and Redcar. He was keen to fight his campaign on his own record rather than that of the Conservatives in government. So what message did voters there want to send to Rishi Sunak? Our North of England reporter Claire Fallon has this.
While the votes were being counted, not far away, it's the ukulele beginners class at Stockton Arts Centre. We've come to talk elections, politics and politicians.
I'm sure that when the election comes that the Conservatives will get a hiding, you know.
In this area, Ben Houchen's win inevitably now means the hows and whys of the vote will be analysed and interpreted by plenty of pollsters and commentators.
Excellent. That is a melody. Ben Houchen's done an awful lot from around here. But I'm not supporting the Conservatives, but he's a Tory. So I was like that yesterday. It's what somebody does locally that's important. But then when they're a party that, at the moment, I just can't get my head round, Rishi and all the shenanigans that have been going on, that's what's put me off the Conservative Party.
Well, I think with the mayor that we've had, Ben Houchen, I mean, I do know what he's done, and he seems to have done quite a lot for the area.
Local versus national is just one of the election interpretation complexities. And we spotted another inside the leisure centre, where the Tories would later get their silver lining.
There is something intriguing when you look around in here, and that is rosette colours. I can see a lot of red rosettes. There are a few yellow rosettes in here, I've seen them, but no blue rosettes, I see.
I think you can see a blue tie and, you know, I'm absolutely a Conservative, which is, I think, the point you're trying to get at.
But after a campaign almost absent of Tory branding, some saw a link with declining Conservative support. And at the nursery, just along the corridor from the count, we found signs of declining trust too.
It's just always been the same. It's just getting, like, the prices of food going up and up. Like, it's not changing, it's just going higher. It's making it worse for people, isn't it? I think they'll be the same.
I think people get influenced by that because we've been let down so much by the government and politics and stuff in the past. So it's, for some people, it's just like, oh, here we are again. Do you know what I mean? But like for me, I've still got a bit of hope that like someone can do something that's going to bring some change.
We've heard a lot of things that it's going to get better and all them promises, but we don't believe that it has happened. Yeah.
Do you think that's going to affect trust?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It will.
Duly elected as Mayor for the Tees Valley Combined Authority.
A win seemingly at odds with the results in other places. But the swing to Labour was big. The Mayor's majority is now massively reduced.
You must have had people saying to you, well, yeah, I'll vote for you, but I'm not going to vote for the Conservatives in the general election.
Yeah, there were people saying that I'm going to vote for you and I haven't decided whether I'm going to vote Conservative at the next general election. Absolutely. And that's why I keep saying to the government, I keep saying to Conservative MPs, we've got to come together and we're going to have a positive vision for the country. We've got to start delivering because people are looking for an excuse to vote for us. They're frustrated with us, some are upset with us, but they're not completely turned off because they want that excuse to be able to vote for us, and we've just got to give them that reason, and we haven't done that yet.
How people here voted can and will be used to tell many stories. But there is another revealing result stat. Turnout, which was down at just 31%.
Well, with me here in the studio, Rosie Campbell, Professor of Politics at King's College London, and Kieran Pendle, Public Affairs Research Director at the polling organisation Ipsos. Kieran, Labour are saying these results show the public want the government to get out of the way. Is that what the polling says?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that these elections took place amidst the backdrop of real intense public dissatisfaction with the way the country's being run. So 7 in 10 told us earlier this year that it's time for change at the next election. Rishi Sunak's net satisfaction rating as Prime Minister is -59, which is the joint worst Ipsos have recorded going back to 1978 for a Prime Minister. So that's the context of these elections. Last night's elections didn't seem to show a great deal of change from where we were a year ago. And I guess what we see with the public opinion polling that we do is that more people would like there to be a general election before the end of the summer, so a majority, 52%, than say the Conservatives should change leader before that election. So it certainly feels like it's time for change at the moment. But of course, until that general election takes place, we just don't know.
Rosie, does the fact that the vote shares haven't really changed year on year mean that people have basically made up their minds?
I don't think it's that simple. I think what we can say right now is the polling right now looks to be pretty reliable in terms of the size of the gap between Labour and the Conservative Party. That doesn't mean that that's set in stone for when an election. You know, election can be as far away as January, and a lot can happen. We've seen how shocks can hit the system. Now, I know, you know, polling guru John Curtis has said it's 99% sure that we're going to see Keir Starmer in number 10 Downing Street, but he did say that could be as part of a minority government. So I think change can happen in the polls. It's very unlikely to change so dramatically that the Conservatives would win. But we shouldn't take for granted that voters have made up their minds now.
But who do you think is most to blame then for Conservative dissatisfaction? Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, or Boris Johnson? You know, because
that's a hard question.
Well, don't people make up their minds based on all of that?
Well, it's not just the leaders, though, either, is it? I do think you've got an important point there that, you know, is it all about dissatisfaction with the Conservatives? Because actually, if we're talking about leader ratings, actually Keir Starmer's ratings are nothing compared to what Tony Blair's would have been in the run-up to the 97 election. So if we're going to put those three in the mix, maybe Keir Starmer has to go in too.
I think the important point here is that the public consistently have told us over the last year or so that there are 4 issues that are most important to them. That's the economy, the cost of living, the NHS, and particularly for Conservative-minded voters, immigration. Rishi Sunak put out his 5 pledges around a year or so ago, and he's not seen as delivering on them. So it really comes down to delivery. There is an opportunity whenever there's a change of leader to sort of reset the political dynamics, and he's not been able to do that, as I've said. So he'll be hoping he can do that in the coming months, but time is running out.
What do you think this election tells us about the importance of the Red Wall, which both the main parties seem obsessed with?
I think it's absolutely critical. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that it's the Red Wall plus lots of other bits of the country. And I think one of the things that the Labour Party will be feeling really pleased about today is, yes, they've done really well in the Red Wall. They've done really well in Hartlepool. They've also done well in places like Swindon.
How does that square, just before you move on to that, with Ben Houchen's win?
Well, I mean...
You know, I was arguing with Mel Stride about whether Ben Houchen is just a sort of personal vote or a Conservative vote at the top of the programme.
I would love to do the analysis to see whether incumbent MPs, whether the personal vote is so big that we don't need to think about party. But I think it's probably a bit too early to say that for sure. But we can see that we also have 2 new Labour mayors. So I think looking at the picture as a whole, focusing on that as a Conservative is probably clutching at straws.
What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think when you look at the story with the Metro mayors that's coming out of the results, in a way it's a success story for the concept, because you're seeing voters vote differently for their local mayor than they might do for councillors or for MPs. Ben Houchen clearly has a personal vote, but we should bear in mind there was a 16 to 17 point swing against him in this contest too. He won 72% of the vote or thereabouts last time, and I think it was about 51 or so this time. So even then, there was
he's gone from bizarrely popular to extremely popular, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still a significant shift. Is the point that if that shift took place at a general election, then the Conservatives would lose all of their seats in that area. So, I mean, there is some sort of consolation there that he's held on, but not much, I don't think.
We've still got a couple of big high-profile results on the mayors tomorrow. West Midlands, where everyone's looking at Andy Street, and of course London, where Sadiq Khan has been battling over lots of issues, not to do with the environment and various other things. Now they've released the voter turnout for London, which is 40.5%, which is above the national average, but slightly down on the 2021 turnout. Do you think Labour's nervous?
Well, Labour certainly sounds nervous when you hear some of the briefing that's coming out of the Labour Party camp. I think, look, our polling at Ipsos shows that Sadiq Khan is a divisive figure in London, and we saw that with the by-election last year in Uxbridge. The big unknown question here, though, isn't just about turnout. It's about what do those people that gave their first preference vote to the Liberal Democrats last time do, and then gave their second choice to Sadiq Khan. What do they do this time? Do they realise and then decide to choose Sadiq Khan first over Susan Hall, or do they stay at home or vote for other parties or stay with the Liberal Democrats? So it's not just a question of turnout. That is important. If turnout's higher in the outer boroughs that are typically more anti-Sadiq Khan than the inner boroughs, and there's a collapse of turnout in certain areas, maybe East London over Gaza, that matters a lot, but it also matters what those first preferences from last time do.
Just in a few seconds, Rosie, if only 30% of the country votes, what's the point of these things?
Well, I mean, the point is that they manage, a lot of our local services. But if we're really thinking about this in terms of the general election, what we compare is previous local elections. So we're seeing the change between the two. And if we look back to the last time that most of these seats were